a lot of people are like, wow, that's amazing publishing your first book after 50. But, I like to think that having lived several decades and having had many experiences
Hmm.
under my belt makes me a more credible novelist. I mean, I'm kind of trying to write about the truths of the human condition. And so one might argue that a 20 or 30-year-old doesn't quite have the seasoning to pull that off 100%. I mean, obviously, there are people who do it well at any age, but I'm just saying I don't think age is necessarily a bad thing when it comes to writing novels.
This is Kim Drucker Stockwell. Welcome to Women's Survival Guide, and I'm here today with Jeanne Blasberg, who is a writer and a farmer, somewhat newly, and we have a lot to talk about. She just came out with a new book called Daughter of a Promise, which I read and I loved. And so we'll kind of be talking about a few things, and my guess is we'll end up having to do a couple different interviews because I talked to you for a while about the farming, and we could have gone on for another 3 hours because
Yeah.
it's pretty cool, and like the reasons behind it, and what I love about it, and that's sort of the whole point of what I'm doing is you're someone who's done not just one but two really big new things after the age of 50, and that's really the premise behind this blog that I'm doing, Women's Survival Guide, is to kind of show people this world of other people that are starting things, or if you've started something, let's talk about it. And so I was thrilled. I heard about the farming, but I was thrilled to hear you didn't come out with your first book till you were 52. Is that it?
Yeah, I think it was 2017. So yeah, I was 52.
That's pretty cool, and that's very gutsy. And I know I'm married to a man who loves, he writes all the time, and I think at one point we were talking about like, well, you know, I think the old theory was new authors don't come up with a book past a certain age, like of any distinction. And
Oh, I
I think
disagree.
I know, no, he's not saying that, but there was this like theory of,
Right.
um, and so and I was like, well, that's kind of weird. I mean, but so you can buck that trend.
Well, a lot of people are like, wow, that's amazing publishing your first book after 50. But, I like to think that having lived several decades and having had many experiences
Hmm.
under my belt makes me a more credible novelist. I mean, I'm kind of trying to write about the truths of the human condition. And so one might argue that a 20 or 30-year-old doesn't quite have the seasoning to pull that off 100%. I mean, obviously, there are people who do it well at any age, but I'm just saying I don't think age is necessarily a bad thing when it comes to writing novels.
That, I mean, to me, that makes total sense. Can't remember what I was just thinking about, but it was something to the degree I was writing. I've been corresponding with so many people lately because I had COVID for 2 weeks basically, and have just gotten my brain back. And so I'm madly like thinking. And but basically that this time of life is, reflective, and it's also hopeful and aspirational. I mean, but it's also a time when people are managing their kids, who are launching or trying to launch, and their parents who are independent
Yeah,
but possibly not actually anymore, or
yeah.
are health issues. And that's another thing I really want to tap into because
Well,
a lot of my friends have that going on right now.
I think that's something important to talk about because I am in a situation where my kids are in their late 20s. One's just turned 30. They all live near each other. And I'd have to say, um, They don't really need me in their life right now. I'm not going to say, oh, they're perfectly launched. Like, are we ever perfectly launched? But
Right.
I'll just say they're at a place where maybe my absence is a good thing. Uh, and during COVID, we lost my husband's parents. My mother passed 20 years ago, and my father's remarried to a younger woman who just takes beautiful care of him. Actually,
Yeah.
I'm so blessed. I do not play that role in my father's life. So we are in this quite unusual place for people our age in our late 50s, early 60s to kind of, we've been removed from the middle of the sandwich a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we felt we have this time. If you want, I don't, who knows when the next shoe could fall. You know, you have this time in the moment, you have some resources, and you have your health.
Mhm.
So, like, it's, if you don't do that big thing that you've been itching to do, well, then kind of shame on you. I feel like I don't have the same obligations or responsibilities that might hold me back if my kids needed me in a certain way, or if I had living elders. I mean, my in-laws lived around the corner from us on Beacon Hill for 25 years. The whole time we lived there, we were three generations interacting all the time and doing things together. And their absence is really quite painful. And so it really felt like doing something big and different was a way of entering the next chapter and helping with the grief a little bit.
Mhm. That is big. And it's, I mean, I can imagine coming back here is difficult to Boston, to Beacon Hill, when you lived it a certain way, and that's just not possible anymore. I mean, it's part of
Yeah.
life, but
It's part
uh,
of life.
it's
I loved raising my family on Beacon Hill. I loved the home in which we raised our family, and people ask me if I miss it. And of course I miss it. I mean, but I can close my eyes and walk through every room,
right.
and I never will be without it. I know that house like the back of my hand. But what I miss is, my kids being in eighth grade, sixth grade, and fourth
Yeah.
grade, bringing
Yeah, that's so
friends over and running around and filling the house with noise and activity. And, there's really no way, because time machines don't exist, that I can get that back. So that house really wasn't the same when the three generations weren't there anymore, and it was just me kind of knocking around. Yeah.
oh,
So yeah.
that's big. And I think taking from that nugget of conversation is there it's not a loss, it's a gain in that it's a prodding for a new beginning. There's yeah, I agree. There's this period of time where your kids are these, you know, unconflicted little love muffins, and then of course they get their own personalities and their own opinions, and there is the pull tug, and then eventually they become their own grown-ups, and that's fun too because I love this aspect of them growing up and what they bring to the table. But
Totally. Yeah.
I think it's important to realize when they go, which they, fingers crossed, they're supposed to, just like you did, go, fly, be free. And what they're into that they don't necessarily need, that they need you to love them, but the idea would be that they have their own lives. And then in your case with uh,
Yeah.
not having to take care of parents, you have a gift of, all right, let's put your money where your mouth is and move out to Wisconsin and buy a farm. Start that.
Well, the one thing that I have to completely confess to, and this is a real place of privilege I come from, which is we have a family tradition in Rhode Island. So
Mm.
selling our home in Boston, where they grew up, didn't mean that we became a family without like a traditional gathering spot or
Yeah.
a familiar gathering spot for
Mhm.
them. So I have to say that is something that made it a little bit easier. But selling the house in Boston allowed not just freeing up like financial resources, but like those old Boston Beacon Hill homes, 200 years old. It was a ticker tape of a to-do list
Yeah,
of
I've got it.
that
Yeah.
needed like the air conditioning, right? It's like
Yeah,
just a constant list of I've got to call this person, I've got to follow up on this. This is peeling, this is breaking, this is
totally.
so just letting go of that list
Yeah.
was so amazing. I felt like I was the one person in our family who kind of, for better or worse, like managed that list and was
Well,
the only
yeah.
one who knew all the stuff in her head.
Hmm.
I've since learned to allow other people to be the experts on how things work. But I didn't really do that so much with that house. Anyway, um, so the book thing really started when the kids were gone. I mean, I really can't believe like some people are amazing authors when they have little kids, and I feel
I
like
don't know how they do it.
there was something about needing my brain space and not to be like not to be preoccupied with the logistics of the family and everybody's comings and goings. And so the reason maybe it took a long time, even though I was writing, was to have like that space in my head to actually work. And then finding myself in Boston with some time to take some classes. And I really treasured the initial years my kids left because I was able to kind of nerd out and take advantage of like this intellectual community in Boston and this literary community in Boston. Go to a lot of readings, become friends with other authors, take classes, and improve the craft. So that's, I'd have it no other way. I don't think if I had come out with a book earlier, it would have been as seasoned and as well done. And the reason I kind of rewound all the way back to the book stuff, and this is kind of a philosophy I've tried with a lot of things, maybe even with sports, but it was scary to put myself out there with a book, with that first book.
Yeah.
And there was a certain amount of fear that I needed to process because I felt vulnerable in a way I hadn't expected. I was really excited leading up to the publication date, but then I remember the day the book was published, I didn't even want to get out of bed and turn on the lights. I wanted to just die. And I was like, I cannot believe I've done this. And now I'm opening myself up to all these reviews and criticism.
Mhm.
Well, the first thing you have to realize is not everybody's going to like your book and not everyone's going to like you. And the people who connect with it
Mhm.
make it all worthwhile. And so book number 2 comes out, same thing. What did I do this again for? Oh my God, didn't you remember this feeling? But same thing with I love to ski, and I do often feel afraid when I'm skiing because I tend to wander into places where I think there's going to be great snow, and then it looks a little dangerous, and then it doesn't look like there's a safe way to go backwards, and then I just have to do it. And I like I like to turn fear into kind of an excitement or an alertness
Mhm. Yeah.
or a something other than fear. And so in these practice, I guess being well practiced with dealing with fear, maybe it makes me a little crazy, but during COVID, I was ready to try something new. Like I really needed to try something new. I was finding that I was really unhappy. Um, I was sensing things in my life for the first time that made me unhappy, and I was able to identify them. And one
Fair.
of them was that I didn't feel like I was spending my time in the most, I don't want to use the word productive, but like I said, I have resources, I have my good health, and I have this time. And I felt like I was filling it up with travel and leisure activities that were fun, but I wasn't really adding anything to society, and I felt like I was leading a pretty self-centered life, and I was disappointed in myself. And that made me unhappy, and it made me like reflect about what I'd want to do differently. And so we made a decision to sell the house and change things up. And we started looking at farmland, which seemed like a really crazy idea too. And you know, I don't want to go into all the specifics of how we ended up in Wisconsin. It's completely random. I have no ties to Wisconsin, but here we are. We were sitting around at dinner last night. It was only 3 years ago on the 4th of July, at a 4th of July picnic, that John and I reconnected with an old family friend. And he said he was interested in regenerative farming. And we said, we are too. And then, you know, here we are now with this 420-acre farm. I laugh because if I knew anything about farming 3 years ago, or what this was all going to entail, there's no way I would have done it. So it kind of has to do with not being afraid, just knowing like you make some choices, some are good, some are great, some are mistakes, but
Mhm.
you can always like you know, you can always hopefully never quite leap all the way, and you can
Yeah.
backtrack that snow, like that ski run where the snow looks good, but maybe I need to go backwards. Anyway, we approach this farming thing like, okay, let's do this. Okay, if everything doesn't work out, we can sell this. We'll sell the land again, and let's do, you know, always trying to make decisions based on like, can we dial that back if we need to? Anyway, we're so far in now, we're not dialing anything back. And it's not so much fear, but it's like faith in a way. It's like I said to some of our farm crew, it's kind of like having kids or getting married, like any great thing you do with your life, like any big thing, you have no idea what it's going to be like when you
Right.
decide to do it.
It's weird
But
when you think about it, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, you have
you're
no
young and
idea the momentous
person.
thing you're signing up for,
Yeah.
but you do it and then it's amazing and there's this magic to it. And so I think even if I'd known how hard this was going to be, maybe I wouldn't do it. But I also had this spirit of like being willing to try things
Yeah.
and knowing that like my husband and I are amazing partners and give each other a lot of well, we're just like we complement each other, but we give each other a lot of strength, I think. And so we knew that like this could be a big money loser, but we could probably stop the bleeding before we lost too much money. But it could be a
Yeah.
mistake in a number of ways, but like it probably wouldn't be because we work really hard at stuff.
Yeah.
And anyway, things are, you know, we're last year was our first season, and that was a brutal first summer to get started with the drought. And
Ah,
our infrastructure, our wells and things took a long time to get put in. So we didn't have a full growing season. This year, we started not with a drought, but with like more rain than has ever fallen in, and it just, and tornadoes and stuff.
I read that in your
I
blog.
feel like
Oh God.
Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz. But anyway, the things are going great right now, actually. We had an amazing harvest today, and we're having the biggest delivery so far tomorrow to to 7 stores. And the weather is cool, and I'm gonna knock on wood. It's
Oh,
sunny
nice.
enough, it's warm enough, we're getting enough rain. It's not like we still have a lot of moisture from the prior rains, but I don't know, our crew is amazing. We had a big team lunch on Tuesday and I ordered 14 lunches. There were 14 of us. I'm like, how that's crazy. We have 14 people working on this farm. Um,
I love
so
that. It's so utterly different than, like let's say 5 years ago, uh, when, pre-COVID and you were, I mean, I think that's one of the big takeaways here, because if you were just an author, I'd still be asking to interview. I love the book. We'll talk about that too. Like, I don't, maybe we'll, this is just nice kind of having this big
Mhm,
mishmash thought.
mhm.
But it's just these are high risk and they do take money or they do take the willingness to lose money at an age where you're it's not like you have the next 30 years ahead of you to go back and get a
Take
job.
it back. I know. I
So I
know.
mean, you're just gonna
The three kids were like, kids,
I know, right? Yeah. By
how do
the
you
way,
feel about
don't
us?
screw any money we were gonna leave you.
I know. You know what? Our kids are so proud of us.
Oh, it's funny. That's one of the neat things about kids. My kids are probably my oldest two are 22, so we're a little behind you guys. But it's cute the way I guess we're so used to us having to are so focused on them. It's hard to remember that they see us too. And when they talk about like if I'm doing this when I'm interviewing people or whatever, and or the art or something, and I forget that they like I
It's
think they
true.
they
Kim, don't
yeah
don't you think our kids make us better people?
they do. And I was just talking to someone about that today. I love I love what they bring to our lives. In the old days, it was us bringing everything, and they
Yeah.
would give us what comic relief and moments of like joy, happiness. Uh, I don't know,
You
being
have
proud.
to do the right thing when you have kids because
Right.
they see everything you do. And so I was working on Eden, my first novel, for like a decade, and was our family had moved overseas for my husband's job, and I came back to the US thinking I had the next great American novel and I was gonna like knock it out of the park. And then I quickly got brought down to earth and started going to all these classes. And then I was like, oh my God, this is just gonna be so hard. And I put the book in a drawer. And one day, I was saying to my daughter, we signed you up for that lacrosse team. You cannot quit.
Right,
And she
right,
said,
right.
well, Mom, what about the novel you're going to write? Like,
Uh,
I could quit that. And I was like, she's right. Like,
uh, thank you.
thank you, Annie. Now I have to finish this
Yeah.
goddamn novel.
But that's what I mean. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be your children, but to have this, in this case, it is our children that are prod us on.
Hmm.
I have the same thing. There are times where I've kind of been like, ugh, whatever, like nobody cares. And they're like, well, you got to do it. Like you got to,
Yeah.
or do it better, or get
Yeah.
back to it, or don't quit, and that is and it could be people's grandkids that do that even because
Yeah.
it's
And so the farm was also a function, I think, of the five of us. I have two boys and a daughter, and then my husband and I, we were sequestered together during COVID. And I think there was just so much anxiety around what was going on in the world, um, around everybody being so ill and the inability to get decent food for a lot of people. And then like racial injustice, the George Floyd thing happened. That
that's
was
big.
just so upsetting. And my daughter kind of took off for a year living in a van. As soon as she could get out of the house, she outfitted a Sprinter van and just got on the road. And she was finishing up that road trip, and I joined her for about a month out west. We
Wow.
started in Portland and we went up. We started in, yeah, Portland, and then drove up to the Seattle area. And then we were in the Olympic Peninsula and then drove
Pretty, yeah,
east
right.
towards like through Washington, Idaho, Montana, and then making our way to Colorado, where she was eventually going to set up like a permanent home in Denver.
Mhm.
Can I tell you how much wildfire smoke we drove through? It was like we could hardly breathe, and there was so much smoke. It was scary. It felt like we were driving into the end of the world.
God.
And like there were lots of beautiful times and awe-inspiring times on that trip. But between what had just happened the year before and the anxiety around a warming planet, and then I watched a couple of documentaries. We all watched all these documentaries about the food system or about our
Yeah, and for you.
topsoil. And I really was like, you know what? What am I on this planet to do? Am I on this planet to like work on my golf handicap? Am I on this planet to sit alone in my house and work on novels that I love it, but and you could argue that art is important and it's always, it's worthwhile, but I didn't feel like that was going to be my great contribution. And fine, maybe this farm isn't like, it's not like a huge contribution, but I feel like we're doing something. We're trying to create something here, even if it's just training and giving a place for 14 young people to work and do what they're passionate about and have um, make money working outside and learn and kind of I don't want to say learning a new way of farming because what we're really doing is going back to the old way of farming,
Yeah.
the way the land was farmed before industrialization and before World War II. Just giving people the opportunity to learn how that can be done and how you can live and produce in symbiosis with nature and not be taking and destroying things. So, um, anyway, it was really that trip. It was my daughter and our talking and kind of the desperation I felt about, I want to be able to feel, I want to, at the end of the day, when I'm lying in my deathbed or whenever it's time for me to go, that I kind of put it all on the line. I don't know. And it's not like, oh, we're putting everything on the line. We have done well and so we're able to do this. And it's not like, but I do have farm dreams. Farm dreams you'll learn are lying in bed and not being able to sleep and dreaming about all your crops washing away in the rain or a fire catching to all your crops and the tornado,
Yeah.
rip the greenhouse out. Like there's a little bit of pressure.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
anyway,
but you're
again,
doing
it's daily exercises in letting go of your fear-based thinking.
well, and you've taken, you leapt, the minute you sold your house here, or bought the land there, one or the other, you did, well, actually, selling that house here probably was the biggest leap. Buying the farm you'd already made that call.
Yeah, buying the farm. You know what? At the time we did it, we thought, oh, this is a business we're buying. We'll pop in and out. We'll delegate all the stuff to other people. It soon became apparent that was not. It's not like you can't just jump in and jump out. We have to be here a lot. Yeah, and selling the house, you realize there's some people who feel like that was a betrayal. Your friends feel like you've left us. But we come back enough. I
Here.
just feel like home ownership is a huge thing. And a piece of real estate that size was draining in a lot of ways. So, I think my real close friends realize Jeannie's mental health is better when she doesn't have the ticker tape of plumbing and electrical problems going through her head.
Before. Yeah, I just think that the lesson is, look, it's not always going to work out. Like there's different risks that you take, and at this age, when you're able-bodied still and able-minded, it's it's worth it. And it's funny. There's got to be a moment that you push yourself, like you're saying. You were in the Sprinter van with your daughter, and I think you must have gone home and just talked to your husband and just said, we gotta change something. This isn't working. But to go back, because you and I have talked, but for other people who don't know, you and your husband during COVID had a lot of discussions about regenerative land
Regenerative farming, yeah.
land use, and that he himself was feeling not spiffing about the work he was doing in the industry he was doing it in, that he might have been adding to the problem of the way the land is being farmed. So I was going to ask you to start with two things. One, I love the story about the way farming changed in World War II and why, and two, how you and your husband together had these thoughts and then it became a reality. Those are, if
Yeah.
you would.
Well, so he's been a consultant to major consumer products companies his whole career. Um, Companies that are either in retail or manufacturers, but a lot of things you buy in the grocery store. And so a lot of things that are convenience foods, snack foods, the type of food that adds to our nation's obesity problem, and also the type of foods that are made from highly processed ingredients. So let's just say that was kind of a downer to think about my life. I mean, he's
Antichrist.
done other really important things with other companies, but he's like, this is not my life's work. So he was also looking to change jobs. And his consulting firm said, don't leave. Would you like to head up sustainability and food systems transformation? And so, actually, what he's doing with big food companies and some of the biggest agriculture companies and nonprofits in the world now is on a macro level what we're trying to do here on a micro level. So his interest really sparked when he learned that in Wisconsin we'd have the opportunity here in Madison to partner with a chain of fast casual restaurants. That customer and the opportunities that that customer presented really got him going. My whole interest was always more on the environmental side. His is like the food and changing the way people eat. He likes to say he's the only man in his family who hasn't had a heart attack before age 60, and he really credits that to his diet and exercise.
Probably, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we
Anyway,
all,
so he really comes at it from the diet side, and that was his real interest. And mine was more about repairing the soil and taking our 420 acres and making sure it doesn't get messed up, and that we have biodiversity on this land, and that we're producing food, a lot of different varieties of food, so that and it's food that humans eat, not food that animals eat. So about 90% of Americans' farmland is either for grazing animals or for growing feed for animals. The USDA considers vegetables a specialty crop. They don't even consider food for humans like what should necessarily be farmed.
right,
So
which I
when
think
I'm
is,
applying for grants, I'm a specialty farmer. Like lettuce is such a concept, or broccoli is such a concept. Cucumbers, whoa, specialty. I always thought of that's what the food pyramid
that's
says. You're supposed to
food.
eat these things first.
Yeah.
Anyway, I am, I think I would have bought the farm even if we just put cover crop down and we didn't grow anything. I just wanted to like preserve our green spaces and preserve trees and things like that. Anyway, this regenerative farm is actually an amazing combination of both of our skills. He's kind of on he works a lot on like our strategy, our sales to this restaurant chain, how the marketing will work, um, paths to profitability and other products we might consider. And I'm really more of the day-to-day person. I'm like the
Team.
on-site HR, CFO, working with all the contractors. And right now we're renovating a barn and working on getting like an ecotourism and event space created. So um, anyway, I don't even remember the question, but I guess, yeah. So he kind of said, I'm not happy with my job. And I was like, yeah, and I'm not happy being like, I don't want a life of leisure. I want to be working with people and doing something meaningful. And, or I just want like all these, there's a certain, set that you're familiar with that, we have a lot of friends who raise money for different nonprofits that are wonderful. And you kind of go to this circuit of I'll give money to your thing and you give money to my thing. And at the end of the day, you've donated to a lot of great causes, but you haven't really made like a huge impact anywhere. And so I was like, what if we just stopped doing that
Yeah.
and took that money and like threw it at this farm? And anyway, it's gotten to be bigger than that. It's just 100% of our besides our kids, this is 100% of our attention right now.
Just give us the blurb about pre-World War II farming. Because
Well,
like
I mean, there were so many small family farms, right? And people worked in communities, so it's not like you had to grow everything. Like there were dairy farms and vegetable farms and probably a lot of corn and wheat farms, but I think people were farming on a smaller scale and were using more natural fertilizers, maybe cow manure or other nitrogen. You know, they'd also rotate crops so that nitrogen would be constantly infused into the soil and there would be a diversity of things on the land. And then
they
when,
rotate always, like each year, would people rotate crops?
well, if you have different fields on your land, you'd rotate beans and corn and things. I mean, there was a much lower tech way to amend your soil. Um,
That makes sense.
After World War II and the emphasis on like feeding a growing population, and then with a lot of the technology that was invented during World War II in terms of like spraying for pests, and fertilizing broadly, bigger and bigger farms on a larger scale came into play with monoculture, so farms that just grow one thing.
Mhm.
Um, anyway, I'm not an expert in this, but the
Yeah.
movement is really, and then those big farms create a lot of product, which then is transported long distances. So the regenerative food movement or the regenerative farming movement takes it back to a regional food system where there's less transportation of goods far away. But our farm becomes a little ecosystem where we have animals and grazing, we're
Mhm.
growing field crops, and we're also growing veggies. And the animals, the ruminants on the land and their grazing improves the grasses, the poop, the manure is collected and we create fertility with that. And more diversity comes back. We're getting rid of invasive species and bringing back native species with native insects and pollinators and growing a diversity of things. So it's not anything new. Indigenous people and farmers since the beginning of time have kind of been farming this way. But
Mhm.
it's definitely not something that's done on the scale of thousands and thousands of acres. It's done more on the scale of hundreds of acres. And so as our nation's farmers are getting to be an average of like 60, 65 years old,
Really
and the
old.
farms are being sold and young people can't afford the land, the farms are either getting sold to become housing developments or they're getting sucked up by big commercial operators who grow like one thing.
Yeah.
And again, that one thing is usually corn that goes to animal feed. Um, and it's subsidized by the government and it's then fed mostly to cows who aren't really meant to live on a diet of corn. So it's not a healthy cycle.
Sounds awful. It's just so depressing. And it's so big. This is a big country with a lot, and so the majority of it is that type of farming.
Yeah, agriculture probably is responsible for about 30% of emissions that contribute to climate change. And a
In
lot of it is the energy used to farm and but also the atmosphere becomes filled with dust and chemicals when all these big farms till. And so the tilling and spraying is kind of the addiction of how to grow crops, uh, or how people have grown up learning how to grow crops. And so I can't claim that we are completely innocent of that, because with our land, we are trying to get rocks out, and we are like having to cultivate and turn things over and disrupt the land as we're getting started. But the ultimate goal is to always maintain a cover crop on the land, a green protective blanket that absorbs water and protects the soil. And then you can actually drill seed into that and
Okay.
grow bigger crops that
Well, that
come
makes
out
sense.
of
So what
that.
kind of, like, is that an alfalfa type thing? Like, what is it that's small and green? Or is it grass? Or what would you grow that
Yeah,
would?
so we do have alfalfa that we
Yeah.
mow for hay, but right now we have corn in the ground. When that comes up in the fall, we're going to plant a rye. And there's something called crimping, which is basically when the rye is gets a certain size, you are like rolling it and smashing it so it flattens it, and it somewhat turns it into green manure, but it also, I think, and I'm like just learning this too, but I've been told that is then a surface into which we can plant another crop. So cover cropping or growing a field crop and then cover cropping is kind of the way to go. You want to leave your fields covered as much as possible. When you go and see big swaths of land that
Mhm.
are just plain earth,
Uh-huh.
uh, they are very susceptible to these torrential rains we're now having, and topsoil can just get washed away. And it takes so many years to build up just like an inch of topsoil, but it can take one big storm and just wash away and erode many inches. And so that's really like the biggest danger, is that if our food system is reliant on that type of farming and our soil becomes that eroded, like the amount of farmland that we can use to feed our country is starting to really decline.
Yeah.
We this early this spring we had dust bowls out here, because when those fields aren't covered and the winds and the storms pick up, there's just dirt in the air.
Which is kind of, I do find the whole 19, was it the 30s, the early 30s?
Yeah, I mean, you'd think we would have learned, right?
I mean, it was really mind-blowing and heartbreaking. I mean, people were just suffocating to death because of and it was it was their own doing. The way they were farming the soil that was just dirt and dried out because they'd had a drought. And then the dust, yeah, it's a really interesting history, and it's sad to think that we haven't learned from it. But
Well, I feel like there's so much of our country's population that's out of touch with where food comes from.
utterly, I mean, I'm very
So
in touch with
I am
it.
guilty. I am guilty. I mean, I wanted to get into this enterprise, and here I buy this land and I move out here, and I'm like, okay, so let's have the field there, and we'll put the greenhouses here, and we'll have our nursery here. Now, like, how do we turn on the water and how do we turn on the lights? And it's like, you got to drill a well, and there is no electricity coming up this far. So this is a bad place to put those things. And
Hmm,
um, this land isn't necessarily, it's going to flood when it rains. So this is not where you want your veggie fields. And so
I love
it's
it.
not so easy. And then to the farmers who actually figure it out and have the family farms that have been operating for generations and generations, those folks have taken on such a financial burden, living with so much debt and stress every year and hoping it will be a good season and that they can then pay off the debt with the harvest and have something left over for their family. I mean, to think that I could have been living in Boston for all these years and buying food, just, ooh, I'll just buy
Yeah.
myself a
No, I
whatever, but you don't even like
think about
realize the sacrifice that somebody probably went to to grow that apple or grow that eggplant. And it's so funny, like the last year I was on my hands and knees. My back was breaking. We're like planting lettuce. And before that, I had been watering all these seeds in the nursery. And I was like, if I see someone at those restaurants that's throwing away a bowl with one leaf of lettuce on it, I'm going to give them a talking to because this is like hard work. And this is so anyway, I just think I'm guilty of it. I was kind of a bi-coastal person. The more and more we become detached with nature and how our livelihood, like what we really need to live, is grown, it's a danger. The
I think
farm bill is about to get approved, and I don't think many people think much about what's in the farm bill. But if you ask me, it's like the most important piece of legislation in
how is
Congress
it?
right now.
Are
It's going
you
to, it gets
familiar with what's in?
approved. It gets approved, and it's the law for 10 years. So all this, all whatever gets supported for the next 10 years is going to be decided in this farm bill. And guess what? It's all the big chemical industrial players that always get treated well, who have all the lobbyists in Washington, and there's really no money going towards a healthier way to farm and healthier food.
So you've looked at it and it's definitely not an improvement.
Marginal improvements, but you're talking about like they're throwing us bones, you know. Um, and you know, I would say um uh if you're allergies and immune issues and cancers and all these diseases that just seem to be so much more prevalent than they ever were.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say like the food we eat has to be obviously contributing to it. So I really see food as medicine, but I also see like um sensibly approaching our food system is a way to address all these awful healthcare issues that we have as well. So I just think like the health of the soil and what is in our soil. And you know, there's so much plastic in our soil right now. Just
Yeah.
addressing the health of our soil, it's really like no pun intended, it's the root of everything.
Yeah. And so what do you do about that? I mean, it's sort of like in the ocean, in the water. It's this is one of those things that it goes back to the conversation we were having where in my mind I'm thinking if I were in my 20s, I would get really proactive about every time I open a box of anything that used to be not plastic, like let's say a tea bag, they all came in paper, M&Ms, it was in paper. They're all plastic now. And the food products are all getting packaged in plastic. I get it. It probably keeps them fresher. However, for the previous 50 years, Nabisco was sold in wax paper. So, okay, is wax paper really that much more expensive to use? I don't know. But all I know is that now it's in plastic and it makes me
I
freaking
think the
crazy.
only thing we can do is not get overwhelmed and do our part, which for a consumer, it's to vote with your pocketbook and try not to buy things that are overpackaged or packaged with a lot of plastic. I mean,
Like Trader Joe's should be seriously, I I don't know, because you just can't go in there and get, yes, it's cheap, but it's all in plastic. So they should take it back. They should say, yeah, we'll take it. I mean,
I
nobody
know
nobody recycles plastic anymore. So
it's
how do you get plastic and like we recycle? What the things getting recycled? I mean, maybe glass,
I don't know, Kim, when I start thinking about this, I get overwhelmed. All I
right?
can do is, and I think overwhelm is the next thing that happens is apathy. So let's not think about like the world, but let's just think about the choices we make every day and whether those choices are promoting a world that we want or not promoting it. And if it means being thirsty until you can find a water fountain and
Mm,
not like buying a single serving plastic drink, or it means buying a different brand of something because you think the packaging is better, or maybe buying things from a local producer with no packaging.
right. I think that's
You
true.
could even decide I'm going to only eat things that are in season. I don't want to promote
Hmm.
food being transported from Mexico or food being transported from California just because I want my blueberries all year long. Maybe I'll buy a bunch of blueberries and freeze them. I
Yeah.
mean, literally, we could go back to the way people used to live, and it's
Yeah.
not like it was impossible.
Right.
Um, it's, we're just used to like clicking a button and having something show up on our doorstep 24 hours later. So we're used to having whatever we want whenever, whatever I'm trying to say. But I think that living a little bit more intentionally, like I I I realized, and this again is through watching a show and reading, but like the avocado industry in Mexico, it's
Yeah.
like, or not just in Mexico, in South America as well, how much water it sucks, and then how much violence and um, how much, I don't know, how much it's hurting some communities.
That's
And
kind of
basically, when I was growing up, an avocado was so exotic, and now
yeah.
you expect an avocado on every sandwich and every salad, and like gobs of avocados for guacamole. And
Mhm.
like that actually has a really negative impact on is having a really negative impact on communities and people who live in another continent. But
Yeah.
you can decide you just don't want to play that game and not eat them when they're out of season in California. They're still traveling a long way to get here from
Yeah. That
California,
you
but at
can't
least
grow
they're
them
not
here, really.
causing gang wars.
Yeah. Really?
Oh
You
yeah, the drug cartels are now kidnapping the avocado growers. It's just they're taking over the trade because it's more profitable than drugs, the avocados. I'm
oh,
not kidding. It's
I
like
agree. Thank God. It's worse than plastic. Just kidding. I can't take it anymore. Um, well, it's so look, we just started with talking about that you've bought a farm, not the farm, and and the amount of knowledge that you've needed to gain, but then wanted to gain because you've made this shift. And it's
yeah,
like,
I just wrote
when
a
you
whole, I wrote two blog posts. One was trying to learn all the nomenclature and vocabulary and how
yeah.
hard it was and how I was struggling. And
Mhm.
then the blog post I wrote right after that was that there's a lot of grace in not knowing everything, and maybe I should just let other people know what they need to know because we have a team and we all bring unique skills. And so just let the mystery unfold and not feel like I need to know everything. And so that's kind of the way I'm going now. I mean, I definitely want to know the names of the equipment we're buying, and so I
Yeah.
can talk to people about the crop plans and things like that. But I've been trying to learn the names of, just like so many people during COVID, I started bird watching, but there's so many amazing birds that migrate through this farm.
That
Anyway,
is a biggie. Bird watching is
there's just so much this old brain is going to absorb. So I decided to see the grace in not knowing everything, and that's really working for me right now.
so how you're leaving there tomorrow? Is it?
Tomorrow, yeah. So when people see this, I don't know when, but we're coming up on the 4th of July week. So I'm going to
Yeah.
spend about 10 days on the East Coast attending a friend's child's wedding on
Ooh,
Saturday, and then cruising into the 4th of July with my family and back to my novel, Daughter of a Promise. I have two book events planned,
wow.
and yeah. And so I'm going to really have a very packed family book toury, seeing friends at a wedding thing. It's going to
Yeah.
be really exciting
So so you won't even spend that much time at your family home. I mean,
in Rhode Island.
yeah.
You know what? I won't, but I think when my kids are able to take some vacation, I'm able to overlap with them. And that's what I've tried to plan, is to
Yeah.
be there when it's kind of a fun occasion to be there.
Mhm.
And then otherwise to be here and working with my team here.
Yeah.
So I'm privileged to be able to go back and forth. My best friend these days, besides my husband, is my dog. And my dog has voted that he loves the farm.
Yeah, that's
My
so
dog has
cute.
died and gone to heaven, actually. So
Oh,
he will stay here and I will always need to come back to be with him.
yeah. Oh, that I'll bet. I mean, sort of, was that versus Beacon Hill?
My dog is 10 years old. He only knew the city.
Poor
And
thing.
then he shows up here and he's like, "What? This existed the whole time and we didn't come here before." It's, you should have seen, like, literally, if a dog, his expression was just like, "I can't believe it." He's so happy here. He
Oh,
loves it.
that's so cute. That's really cute. I'm
Yeah.
happy for. What's his name?
Well, this will give away the fact that I'm from Boston. His name is Brady.
Oh, that is so funny. Well, it's okay. He could be named Brady with nothing to do with the former quarterback here. So,
I know.
that's great. Well, I'm happy for him because we go up to New
Every
Hampshire.
dog should live out his the rest of his life on a farm.
Yeah, I know. Well, I guess that's why they talk about buying the farm or whatever. But um, if you want, we can slip into talking about your book, or we could do it
I'd love
next
to.
time. You want it? All right.
Yeah,
So we're going to shift gears a bit from the farm to I have got your other two books, but I need to read them. But I knew I needed to read this one because we were going to talk about it. And Daughter of a Promise, and it's a great read. I'm a really slow reader, apparently, according to my family. But I like to really get into a book. And I'd say one of the biggest questions I have is when you're writing from the perspective of somebody that you're not, how do you take any heat? And again, I haven't read the other book, so this is just maybe a naive question, but how do you, you're not, your parents aren't from Cuba, I don't think, or so how do you do that and not get abused for it by anyone?
yeah, great question. So this is the first novel I've written entirely in the first person from the
Mhm.
point of view of one of the characters. My second novel, The Nine, has one character who's in the first person point of view in her chapters, but I would say her background closely mirrors my own, so
Okay.
that was different. Um, so yes, I write this novel from the point of view of Betsabe Ruiz, who is a 23-year-old woman who's recently graduated college, but her family's from Little Havana. And she is actually, at the time of the telling, she's a little bit older and she's writing this story as a letter to her unborn son. So she's kind of got that moments of being that older, wiser narrator and commenting on the action. And then in other times, she is in scene. She is a wide-eyed, excited young girl or young woman beginning, just lit up by New York City and the beginning of her adult life. And I would say I worked very hard at writing this character as the individual that I saw her to be.
Hmm.
And I saw her to be a fully formed person who was intelligent, who had hopes and dreams, who had regrets and all sorts of thoughts and experiences. And I am writing about Betsabe Ruiz and Betsabe Ruiz only. And I am not trying to write a book where my main character is representative of a people or a group of people or an entire culture. That is not my intent.
Hmm.
But I think if you work hard at writing an individual and you do your research about what's appropriate, what's um, true to that person, it's important to write from people's that aren't yourself, from the point of view of characters who are not yourself. That I think so much literature has been written by authors who seek to know what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes, to have
Mhm.
empathy,
I like that,
to
yeah.
learn and to do research. And I can't just have a book full of characters who are 58-year-old white women. I mean, I just can't. And I think that I think that it comes with a lot of responsibility. I'm not saying, oh, like I can do this and don't ask me any questions about it. I knew that I was treading into territory that could open me up to criticism,
Yeah.
but I also really tried to do it well, and that involved working with an editor who did her reads because I worked with her because she's from Miami and she's of Cuban descent, and she also moved to New York to work in finance. So she came from kind of a big Miami family, and I don't know, there was as many similarities to my main character as you could possibly wish for. And she read it through and had many comments.
Mhm.
And then I was able to make some additions, revisions, deletions, but I then talked to her a lot because at the point in which she read the book, I was going to then make some more big changes. I think every time I made big changes, I'd be like, Mia, can you, because now she knew my character really
Yeah,
well, and we would
right.
like,
You should be doing this, yes.
she'd be kind of helping me. And that gave me confidence. And so in the industry, it's called like a sensitivity reader or a cultural editor
Oh,
or
cool, yeah,
sensitivity
okay.
editor. So,
That makes sense. So that's a thing. I
oh
like
yeah,
that.
it's an
Yeah.
important thing. I think if, yeah, anybody who's going outside of their own um
Oh,
day-to-day world,
yeah.
obviously I want to make sure I'm representing like her neighborhood, her traditions, her religion, her customs in a way that's somewhat like true. But she's from a family that's, I'm not saying it's like every other family. She has a grandmother. I'm not saying it's like her grandmother's practices were like everyone else's. Her grandmother was a very spiritual person, a healer,
Mhm.
somebody who um practiced Santeria and prayed to a more natural set of deities than is common. And so bringing in the worship of nature was important to me. And so that's also what led me to kind of an Afro-Cuban um, culture. And I had a friend who was someone I wrote was in a writing context with who was Cuban, and her life just kind of inspired it. And we'd also, my husband and I have spent a lot of time in Miami, so I just felt like that kind of, and then there's a certain component of Judaism in the book, and I felt like the New York to Miami connection was
Yeah,
important, and the Jewish Cuban overlap in Miami was important. So for a whole number of reasons, I was just determined my main character was going to be Cuban American.
that's so cool. I love it. I mean, and you did it really well. You're not, and like you say, many authors, you can't just write about who you are and then, but there are a lot of people out there who aren't, who don't like it when people walk in the shoes of another.
Yeah, I know.
I
I
think is
was ready.
unfortunate.
I am ready, and I was ready to
Yeah,
take that heat. I
I
feel like there's a certain amount of intimidation that can be directed towards authors to
yeah,
not do what I did.
yeah,
But um, again, I think it's important. I mean, I think that art can't be dictated from a world of fear where you are afraid of being criticized, and you're afraid of being criticized in this moment because we have racial or cultural conversations going on, and like this is off limits to you, and this is where you can write, and this is your space, and this is your space, and this is your space.
mhm,
I'm actually offended by that. So
yeah,
I wanted to try to do this, and I wanted to try to do it well. And if somebody wanted to criticize me for it, I'm kind of ready to get into the debate because
yeah,
um, we're going to become such a siloed, whereas I think our goal should be to, we are one. Our human experience is more alike than it is different.
Yeah.
And to find the commonalities that we all, what we share in terms of our life's experience, I'm more interested in that. I'm more interested in us all coming together and agreeing that we share certain really fundamental things than like dwelling on the ways in which we're different and um, why I can't relate to you. Like you
Yeah.
cannot relate, like I don't accept that. I think we can all try to relate to each other. And so, um,
We can
again,
also respect and honor the differences, you know, whether
yeah,
it's your the texture of your hair or the color of your skin, that
right.
it's
And yeah, it's so yes, the answer is I knew I was treading into dangerous territory, but with Mia on my side and then my publisher who's super, super conservative when it comes to cultural appropriation,
mm,
with her blessing after she read it and she thought I did an excellent job, I felt like, okay, I think come at me. We'll have the conversation. Even if my book became a lightning rod for the conversation,
at
I
least
would
it's
be
that.
happy with that because
Yeah,
it's conversation. It's
exactly.
like, let's not put everybody in boxes
Right. I
of
love
what they're
that.
allowed to do.
I think that's kind of I think that's part of our age groups kind of reckoning is that, wait, we grew up in this world where Fat Albert was okay, you know, the Cosby Show was okay, Sanford and Son, the Jetsons, or not the Jetsons, the Jeffersons, and these things as a young white kid normalized the races to me. That's, you know, people are all over the place. Like, you know, they're big, they're small, they're, you know, wealthy, they're not wealthy, they're educated, they're not educated. It's like just like everyone else. Whereas now you just get in so, you know, they've made it so people have to be so apologetic constantly. So that it always has to be this fight. And I like what you said, which is I think we have more in common than we don't. And no matter what, even in politics, I mean,
Yeah.
people, you know,
Well,
it's just
that's another theme
painful.
in the book, Kim, because it is the retelling of an ancient story that was told in
Right.
Book of Samuel.
Yeah.
It's the retelling of a love story, or call it a love story, call it inappropriate, but it's the relationship between a man and a woman.
Mhm.
And it's if you believe it actually happened, it would have been thousands of years ago.
Right.
And I don't think things have changed that much. We have a lot in common when it comes to that dynamic. Than you know, we have more in common than you would think for two people that had this relationship thousands of years ago. So,
Yeah.
um, the human struggle is timeless, and I would say it's universal. The and my character brings what I always like in my book is that my character brings a bit of an outsider perspective.
Mhm.
She feels herself as an outsider. I mean, I worked on Wall Street as my first job out of college. So, in a lot of ways, her struggles with her investment banking training program are from my memory of what happened to me.
Yeah.
Um, and then on top of her struggling with the content of the work and having to kind of pull all-nighters in order to feel, and then she rises to the top of her class, though she has this like feeling that on a number of different levels, like this place just isn't for me, and
Yeah.
like how did I end up here? And I think that's a universal feeling. I don't think you have to have dark skin to feel that, but I had to like honor that and know that that's an extra sense of weight she
I was
had
gonna
on her
say it's an extra
shoulders.
because I think
And it's
now
yeah.
and
And so
generationally
anyway,
even.
she has a best friend and a roommate in this novel who's white, who's the descendant of a family that you would meet if you read my first novel, Eden. And one might argue I should have written more from the point of view of a character like Ray, the the offspring of a well-to-do family who, but can you see me writing her having a roommate who is a dark-skinned woman? I mean, I just feel like that would have been othering Betsabe even more than if I tried to inhabit her skin. And so yeah, anyway, I'm circling back to that very first question.
Yeah, no,
But I
it was
do like I I I attempted in this book to write relationships, whether it's this loving relationship between her and David, or if it's this best friend roommate relationship between
yeah,
her and Ray. These are relationships that could be fraught if you just look at them from the outside, but they find common ground in different and surprising ways. And I think one of the attempts I made in this book was to show that with a little bit of work and a little bit of courage, like we can all relate to each other. I mean, the whole
yeah.
thing, David and Betsabe, it's a little different. It's a romantic
That's
relationship.
different. That is definitely different. But I definitely, you know, I think your point is it does with a little bit of work and a little bit of patience, you can generally find something to talk about with
Oh,
anybody. And
we can, yeah, we can be friends. We can have a relationship. We can understand and love each other, but it wasn't always easy for them. And I did want to show that even though they were found each other super annoying and frustrating at times, they
yeah,
did, and I think they're just from a generation where they were determined to make this friendship work. They really did care
yeah.
for each other.
I mean, look, there were just some moments in your book. We're back. We're talking about Daughter of Bronze. I think I was impressed by the sex scene. And what did I like about it? Um, I mean, which has got to be hard to write. Well, so as a painter, there's been things I've thought about painting. There's been, whatever. And then there's the thought of, oh shit, then my kids are gonna see, this show of penises or whatever. It's or like or writing a sex scene and whatnot. I mean, it's a thing. I mean, it's out there, it's in print, and you had to think of it. And I think of it sometimes when I read other authors' works, I'm like, wow, I wonder what their wife thinks about that or their husband. Like, that's pretty racy. um, but I thought it was really well done.
You're talking about the first time David and
Yeah.
Bets are together.
Yep. I thought.
I thank you. The book's been described as a feminist novel,
Mhm.
and I think I didn't set out, well, I did kind of want it to be a novel that showed a young woman's agency, and
Yeah.
definitely in her sexual experiences, she's um maybe surprising with what's going through her head or her reactions. And yeah, I appreciate you saying you think it's well done. They definitely take a long time to try to get right.
Do that. So it's like, yeah, it's like versus other parts of the book from a,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, it's funny, if you talk about my evolution as a writer, Eden was all about women and unplanned pregnancies, and so there was a lot of sex going on, but there were no sex scenes. It's very
Interesting.
much like, and then she was pregnant. And then in the Nine, which is about a scandal that happens on a boarding school campus, really the sex is messy teenage sex that's not really even what you would consider like fully satisfying.
Yeah. There's a
And
show.
so then, but writing about David and Bathsheba, I mean, the book, the story, it's about the sex, right? It's
Yeah.
about
The
him
tension. Yeah.
wanting her and her lying with him, and
Yeah.
then I am pregnant. That is the message she sends him. I mean, that's basically the Bible story in a nutshell.
Hmm.
So, and then, very surprisingly, also there's hardly any sentences in this paragraph that tell you the whole story. And one of them is that she had just bathed to purify herself after her period.
Right. Yeah. I've actually circled the whole thing about period too.
which
I
is,
actually talked about to myself. Here it is on page 113. Um, I don't know. I'd have to reread it. Darn it, I should have done that. But that's funny. That's definitely like a thing that I was like that. I mean, I didn't take tons of notes because I wanted to enjoy the book and not read it as though I was reading it for a course. But I do like to be able to write in a book. I don't know. I think, uh,
yeah,
and
I
then
agree with that.
yeah, I mean, because I have trouble remembering things anyway. So to be able to flip through a book and sort of see where I wrote is kind of cool. I definitely what was the other thing? I think the treatment of I wrote about of David with Grant. Like that's that was something, I think. Just so there's the appropriate age lover or potential lover, and then there's the older boss lover, and the older boss lover can do stuff to the younger lover and does. It's like,
Yeah. So in the original story, Uriah the Hittite is Bathsheba's husband. So in mine, she doesn't have a husband, but she has this more age appropriate love interest.
mhm.
And in the original story, when Bathsheba becomes pregnant, David calls Uriah the Hittite in from the war, and it's like, why don't you sleep with your wife? Like that would kind of take care of
Oh,
this whole thing, and
oh,
paternity of the baby would all be legitimate.
yeah.
But he's a really good soldier, and he refuses while he's on duty to consort with his wife.
Rats.
So then David is stuck sending him back to war with this message, and the message is put him in the front line. Basically, he's going to be carrying his own death warrant and he's going to be killed. So my parallel was Wall Street. David is now sending Grant to the Hong Kong office just before COVID breaks out. And not that he
I
knew COVID was
know.
going to break out, but he kind of knew that that was
They
career
knew.
suicide.
Oh,
Yeah.
wait, should we be saying that? I don't want to spoiler alert. I should spoiler alert this somehow.
It's not 100%. Yeah, I mean it. Yeah, I guess that's a little bit of a spoiler. But if anybody knows the original story, they're gonna know that David works his magic to make things
Yeah.
happen the way he
Yeah,
wants. Yeah.
and he can, because he can, and that's sort of the way of the world. For some reason, I starred page 99 and circled generational. It's like a little treasure hunt. I'll have to reread that. I should have. Well,
What's
I never,
what's
mhm.
the sentence? What's the sentence? Maybe I'll have a
Sentence
clue.
is, it could have been a paternal gesture or flirting, but in the moment, I tried to shrug it off as generational. Ah, now I see. Like David must have. So I'm saying, the closeness between two people who had been working together for 14 hours straight when most were on holiday. Yeah. It's one of those moments that as a woman, it's inevitable that it happens in the workplace because especially when you're right out of college or whatever, when you're sort of young enough and dumb enough, or maybe curious enough to allow yourself to be in a
Let's
situation,
say inexperienced.
inexperienced enough, but wanting and curious to allow yourself to be in a situation where it may not be appropriate, but if it's not, it's not on you. It wasn't you. It was I don't know, it's just like the curiosity. And so that this is, I think, any woman who's worked in an office setting or in I mean, pretty much any office setting,
Yeah.
um, this is a potential thing that, and then I think maybe as a result, you also know where it can go, like where it might go or where it might not go on both counts. Like,
I know. I think as older women, we see it coming when we read and we're a little worried for her and
yeah,
cringing. I
you're
think
like,
that Sebe is writing this from the perspective as an of the older woman as well. Not as old as I am, but older than she was when it was happening.
right.
And she's also in some ways trying to justify her choices, but totally aware her choices weren't entirely like the smartest thing to do.
Mm.
Or maybe if she had to do it over, would she have done it over? I mean, um, I
Well, and
wanted her
Grant,
to, yeah,
Grant just kind of, I feel, I mean, you kind of know Grant and you're like, oh, poor Grant. He got totally,
he's gonna get hosed.
he's gonna get hosed. And you know what? It's like she's it's funny. There's like a couple things and tell me what you think since you walked in her shoes in your writing, but there is the she is already bettering herself than her family. She is already financially head over heels where they ever were. And
Well,
she's
now,
got the
Jim,
boss engaged in her. And she maybe I haven't read it for a couple of weeks, but maybe she quickly jettisons Grant mentally and makes plenty of room for David mentally and then physically because he
I
can't
know.
get
I think
away.
that in the Betsabe in the beginning pages, I don't know if she was valuing like money and power. I don't think she ever truly was, but definitely
No,
towards the end of the book, when you say, I think she would see her family in Miami as way more stable and put together than what she had thought she'd um like achieved in New York. So
that's what
it's
she
one of
learned.
those books where you have a character who thinks, "Oh, my family, they can never understand what I'm going through. There are a bunch of
Right.
bumpkins down there
Yeah.
and I'm living the real life in these
Right.
skyscrapers." And it
Yeah.
doesn't take long for her to realize after the city's been scavenged by disease and all these
Mhm.
things have happened that maybe everything she needed to know she learned at her grandmother's knee.
Yeah. I think that comes through too. I mean, but there are these, you don't always love her and her choices.
No,
And Grant, you kind of were like, oh, and he hangs it out there and he's like, I don't, in so many words, I don't need any more friends. I'm good. I've got friends. You're not a friend.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, she makes some bad choices, but we also have all been 23, and I think if you only made good choices, that wouldn't be a believable character either, right?
No, no, that's what I mean. I think I mean, can you imagine how boring it would be?
That,
But, and
yeah, we need
untrue.
to read books about conflict and people
Yeah.
figuring stuff out, and I think a lot of a coming of age novel is you have a heroine
Hmm.
and she's poised to jettison into like all this success, but then something really unexpected and somewhat tragic happens, and she's got problems. She's got to make decisions on how to deal with them, and she makes some good ones, she makes some bad ones, she makes some good ones, she makes some bad ones, and then there's kind of an epiphany,
Yeah.
uh, an epiphany born out of tragedy,
Mhm.
and then she becomes a new person. She's kind of reborn. Um, so
It is, it's, uh, the whole thing of when you think about your family and you're that age and you think okay, the part where she is pregnant and she's there being pregnant in New York and her mom and grandmother are back in Miami with no idea, that as a mother of three girls that are the same age basically as she is, it's like, oh my God, please don't do that to me. Like, please let me help you. It's just
I know.
it's
I feel like the whole time she's pregnant, up until she goes to the hospital, and I'm again, spoiler alert, but I'm not gonna
oh yeah,
describe that anymore. But I think she isn't really dealing with her pregnancy. She hasn't told her family about David.
no,
COVID is keeping everyone from having in-person conversations. They kind of think they'll be able to go down there at some point and introduce David to the family and say we're having a baby. But obviously that day never is possible. And it's like Probably the cruelest thing you could do to your parents is to not tell them that that's going on with you.
It's a biggie. I mean, I get that she has the double-edged sword of like being Catholic and just the whole, and also being the great next hope, like all the hope on, and I think the stress of her sending money to them, that's stressful. And so it's both a source of pride, but it's also a source of uh of stress and probably resentment at a certain point, because she's like, I'm 23, like that's all you have to say to me. I did love that. I really enjoyed reading it. Yeah.
Oh,
um
thanks.
yeah, I can't wait
Um,
to see what you come up with next, but it may be a little farm oriented.
oh, it might be. I'm actually putting a character on a farm after a little bit of a journey through the country. So we'll see if I can pull that one off.
Will you extend any of the characters
So
in?
Tamara, who's David's daughter,
Yeah.
is another biblical character who has a tragic story of her own, and probably it's really the low point of David's life and how he interacts with his daughter in a certain situation.
Mhm.
Many people might know the original story, but I don't want to go into it because it's
Yeah.
pretty awful.
Okay.
Um, but I may have my Tamara run off from New York and have an experience of her own because she's had it with, well, she just needs to leave. She just needs
Yeah.
to get out of New York and get away from her father and her family.
Yeah, for sure.
So, she has a little bit of a odyssey, let's just say. But it's definitely a work in process. I'm kind of working writing my way through figuring it out. I'm it's gonna be a ways off. In the
Yeah.
meantime, I'm writing a lot about the farm
Well,
on my
that's good.
blog
And
and things
you've
like
got a
that.
lot. I mean, how wonderful. I mean, you are a newbie, I mean, this is not like, oh yeah, well, actually somebody, my aunt was a farmer or something, like, no, you are fresh from the
Yeah.
sea.
I want to be honest. I want to be like, I'm somewhat self-deprecating and all the things I didn't know that I probably should have known. And then I just want to be honest in terms of like the joy and the obstacles with this journey, because wouldn't it be wonderful if other people found acres of land that they wanted to save and preserve or get into conservation, not even like necessarily growing food, but just caring for the land. It's really, really satisfying.
Yeah, I think that the point taken of, you had a need to not cruise on for the next 30 years in the gear that you were in, and you shifted. And I think that is the most important thing for me personally to take away from it, because it takes a lot of guts to upend what is a perfectly respectable, happy life. Um, but I think that
Yeah.
I'm talking to myself too, but I think the lesson is, it can be a happy life, but so can this over here. And maybe
But you
that's,
know what? It's not a one or the other because the
yeah,
core of my life is has always been the same, and like the people who are my good friends wherever we are in the country or the world, we're still friends, and the only thing that's really changed is that home ownership. And yes,
yeah,
that goes with certain ties to the community, but I don't know, I feel like I didn't have to say like goodbye to my friends or my kids.
right.
It's just I'm not in the same place as them for a lot of the
Your
time.
daily, yeah, you're not, and that can be really, like, I went back to get my MFA when the girls were, in fourth and sixth grade. And I went from being, well, I went working for a real estate development firm, to having three kids, to just finding not being able to manage that, to becoming an interior designer, decorator, and having some success at it. And then I could call my shots, then having the crash of 2008 kind of wipe it out, and I kind of lost interest, to eventually going back getting my MFA. And it was like a 6 day a week, full time, 3 year while school is in session, so am I. And getting someone to pick up my kids, getting someone to do that's what care.com was like a godsend.
Yeah.
Anybody needs anybody, go to care.com. But it freaks out your friends. Not everybody's
That's the thing.
you're like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, get
You
back
can't
here.
do,
What are you
we're
doing?
all supposed to be
Like,
doing the same thing.
you're not
And
change
if
is
you
bad.
and also if you're doing something different, that means you're criticizing the way I'm
Maybe
doing my
I should be
thing.
doing something different, or maybe you think
Yeah, and I'm like, no, it doesn't, it's not that. It's my own journey and my own mental health needed a
right,
change. Like we're all
right.
even if the outside looks the same, we're all walking this life a little differently with our own issues.
But it is super, it can be very difficult for the people around you to initially. And on top of it, you're busy and you're engaged and your thoughts are different, and you're busy and you can't necessarily be there at certain points for people. At this point you've shaken it out, my guess is, but initially people get hurt because you're not as engaged as you were, because you've decided to make this change and through no fault of their own. And
Yeah, maybe it's a little easier because I was just gliding right out of COVID when we were all
oh
kind of
yeah, that's
dismayed.
true. I guess you have COVID, but
COVID
yeah,
became like a restart button. Like I
a lot of
like
people.
computer went off and then I had to hit restart. And by the time it rebooted, I was out of there.
Yeah. No, I think that, I mean, you wouldn't believe how many people I talk to that the first words are, well, during COVID, you know, I realized. It's like, oh, it's a pretty trippy time, and when you think about it. Like, we're gonna shut everything down for an
And you're
unknown
gonna have to
period of
sit
time.
here and like think about your life
Yeah,
because
you're like, you're gonna drink a lot, and eventually you're gonna realize it's a bad idea. You're going through
yeah,
menopause.
yeah,
You're like, it's like, okay. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, we all had our COVID journeys.
yeah, yeah.
I think that
I
people
agree.
and I know you talk about that, and then we'll wrap it up, but I do think that I'm starting to see little reflections of COVID coming out in literature and whatnot, and I think it's fine. I think for some people, I mean, look, we had a pretty good COVID, aside from my, like, yeah, getting taken apart by menopause initially and whatnot. My poor kids.
Well, Kim,
Once I figured
so
out how to manage it.
in addition to people telling you not to write from the point of view of a culture that's not your own,
Yeah.
they also told me not to write about COVID.
Oh, yeah.
So the COVID timeline intersects with the timeline of my novel, and it's not a book about COVID, but the fact that COVID happens and people go home from work and sequester in private, it definitely aided my plot and became a way I could have these two people kind of have an incubating relationship
Unknown to
strengthen
anyone else.
outside of anyone ever
Yeah.
seeing what was going on.
I love that. And I think it's time that people can come back with it now. I mean, I can't believe
Oh,
how
major. It's like, are you kidding? Nobody's the same after this happened, yet we don't want to write about it. But I get it. It's a
yeah.
little raw. It's a little too soon.
Right.
Um,
I mean, it depends on what it is, I guess. But it is a pretty extreme, we all thought, oh my goodness, look at the post World War One period of time with influenza and the next 20 million people that died from that or whatever. And you're like, what a crazy time. You're like, wait, we had a pretty crazy time too, but it's hard to respect it yet, to fully, because we're all like on a tear to catch up. Uh, Although now I feel like it's kind of
yeah, I'm
relaxed.
not on a tear. I'm on the opposite of a tear.
Yeah, I'm more kids graduating and launching and whatnot. But
Oh, congratulations on that. And I'm sorry you had COVID.
I know we lost senior year in high school to COVID, part of it. Uh, and those kids just graduated from college. So I had two, and now we have one as a sophomore, give me a junior. So Yeah, it's fun. I'm so excited for them. It's
Yeah.
exciting. And is there anything else you wanna
No, you're so generous, and thank you for following up and having this conversation with
oh,
me,
I'm
and I look
excited.
forward to seeing what comes of it. And if you need any more info or want to talk again, just let me know.
And I definitely will because I've got to figure out because I just think your two big worlds right now are so important. And I also want to talk to you at some point about I love your about in your Substack. Um,
Oh,
I think that's great. And it actually I sent it to a woman I sometimes bounce stuff off of a friend of mine, and I was like, this is your idea. I have it a few minutes, but anyway, it's just basically the idea that where we are right now in our midlife.
yeah. Yeah, we all want to do something big, and it's a scary time, but let's talk about it and cheer each other on.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. Well, thank you for your time,
Oh,
and
you're welcome.
safe trip tomorrow. And I will catch up with you soon.
Okay, Kim. Great to
Jeanne
see you.
Blasberg. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. So that was Jeannie Blasberg, and I think that was a great conversation. I have so many questions I still have for her. Um, and if you have questions, let us know because she has written 3 books. I'll tell you what they are. So that was Daughter of a Promise. The other one is called Eden. That's the first book, and The Nine is the second book. And again, Daughter of a Promise is the third. And yeah, thank you so much, and see you next time. Bye.